No one aboard Flight 402 anticipated seeing an offense occur at an altitude of 30,000 feet. We often believe we understand our response to unfairness. Yet when the most influential individual in first class rose and broke the stillness with his punch, the aircraft cabin didn't merely fall silent, it became paralyzed with fear. Richard Sterling believed his affluence served as protection. He considered the young man in seat 2A to be nothing more than an annoyance he could easily overcome. However, Richard neglected to review the passenger list. He was unaware that the crimson stain on his fist was on the verge of sealing his own demise. When the aircraft's wheels finally met the runway, not only were law enforcement officers awaiting him, but also a harsh awakening that would ruin his whole existence. Richard Sterling straightened the sleeves of his custom-made Armani attire. Observing his image in the window of the private lounge at O'Hare International Airport, he approved of his appearance. At age 45, Richard held the position of Regional Vice President for Vanguard Logistics, an individual capable of transferring millions in cargo with just one autograph. His jawline resembled that of a politician, and his gaze was as sharp as a predator's. This particular day marked the pinnacle of his professional journey. He was traveling to London to finalize the purchase of a smaller, struggling shipping rival. Should he secure the agreement, he would achieve partnership status. Should he not succeed, he would stay merely affluent instead of becoming excessively rich. Richard was not accustomed to failing. He savored a mouthful of his 18-year-old scotch, then glanced at his timepiece, a Rolex Daytona. As expected, another, he barked at the server, without bothering to meet his gaze. "Sir, your flight will commence boarding in 10 minutes, the bartender, a weary-looking young man named Jason, informed him. Did I inquire about the timetable? Or did I request a beverage? Richard's tone was suave, deep, and imbued with clear intimidation. Jason served the beverage, and Richard accepted it. Swallowing it in a single draught, he sought to alleviate the intense pressure from the merger. The situation had been bothering him for weeks. He hadn't experienced restful sleep in 72 hours. He felt akin to a tightly wound spring, tense and perilous. He seized his leather brief, crafted from Italian calfskin, and strode purposefully from the waiting area. He moved through the throng of ordinary passengers as if a sharp stone in a current. He detested commercial air travel, even when seated in first class. He perceived himself to be encircled by livestock. He merited a personal aircraft. Following this London transaction, he vowed to himself that he would never again travel with the common populace. He reached gate K12 precisely when the announcement for priority boarding occurred. He circumvented the queue of families and exhausted business people, displaying his platinum status credential to the gate attendant, an individual named Emily, possessing gentle eyes and a forbearance soon to be challenged. Greeted him. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Sterling," she offered with a smile. "Seat 1A, have a pleasant journey. Simply ensure there's adequate space for my hand luggage on this occasion." Richard muttered, seizing his boarding pass. "Your previous inefficiency compelled me to check a bag. That was intolerable." "We will endeavor to do our utmost, sir," Emily replied, her grin showing signs of effort. Richard proceeded angrily along the jet bridge. A stale scent of recirculated air and aviation fuel filled the cabin. He boarded the aircraft. He was welcomed by Sarah Jenkins, a tall, professional flight attendant. With 2 decades of experience, Sarah had encountered every passenger type: intoxicated, amorous, confrontational, and anxious. Yet, the instant Richard Sterling boarded her flight, a shiver ran down her spine. His aggressive demeanor struck her with the force of a tangible impact. "Welcome to British Airways, sir," Sarah offered. Richard offered no reply, instead brushing past her and veering left into the first-class section. This space was meant to be his refuge, a private, leather-clad compartment where he could enjoy champagne and refine his presentation for the London board. However, upon reaching row 1, he halted. The overhead compartment above seat 1A was shut, and in seat 2A, immediately behind him, sat a young man. He was not a corporate executive or a famous personality, but a black adolescent, perhaps 16 or 17 years of age. Dressed in a worn gray hoodie, baggy jeans, and scuffed trainers, he wore over-ear headphones. His eyes were shut, and his head swayed gently to an unheard melody. Richard gazed intently. The young man appeared entirely mismatched with the pristine, opulent surroundings of the first-class cabin. In Richard's biased and agitated state of mind, the boy seemed like a blemish on an immaculate surface. Richard unlatched the compartment above 1A. It was occupied. A dark backpack and a skateboard were crammed within. Richard's complexion flushed a deep red, a stark contrast to his blue necktie. "Excuse me," Richard uttered, his voice piercing the background boarding music. The boy remained oblivious. Richard then forcefully closed the bin. The sound resonated like a firearm discharge. The boy flinched, his eyes suddenly wide open. He lowered his headphones to rest on his neck. "Oh, are you all right?" he asked. "Is this yours?" Richard indicated the bin with a well-groomed finger. "This rubbish." The boy blinked, bewildered. "My bag. Yes, that's mine. This is first class," Richard whispered, leaning closer. "Overhead space is reserved for suits and briefcases, not skateboards." "The flight attendant placed it there," the boy stated, his tone composed despite his tired eyes. "She assured me it was acceptable." "Well, she made a mistake," Richard retorted sharply. He opened the compartment, seized the backpack, and pulled it out. "Hey." The boy rose, unfastening his seatbelt. "Do not handle my belongings, Mr. Sterling." Sarah Jenkins materialized beside Richard, her expression severe. "Is something amiss?" "Indeed, there is an issue." Richard thrust the backpack into Sarah's grasp. "Locate an alternative spot for this. I require this area for my suit jacket and brief. I refuse to have my possessions creased because some recipient of aid brought his playthings aboard." A hush fell over the cabin. The other occupants, a prosperous couple in row 3 and a technology CEO in 1F, averted their gaze, clearly uneasy. The boy stood to his full height. He was tall and slender, yet he conveyed no aggression. He simply appeared exhausted. "It's not a plaything," the boy stated gently. "It's a present. I couldn't care less," Richard retorted, turning his back to the boy. He forced his briefcase into the newly vacated compartment and settled into his seat, vigorously unfolding a newspaper. "Bring me a Scotch double, straight up." Sarah observed the boy, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "I am truly sorry," she murmured to him. "I'll locate a space for it in the forward closet. Kindly settle into your seat. Don't allow him to bother you." A deep breath was drawn by the boy, his gaze fixed on the rear of Richard's head, his eyes reflecting an odd blend of fury and compassion. "No worries," the boy stated, his tone unwavering. "I'm fine." He settled back into his chair. Richard's lips curled into a smirk from behind his newspaper. Victory was his. It always was. Yet, he remained oblivious that he had just ignited the fuse of a device destined to shatter his existence. The aircraft departed the terminal 20 minutes behind schedule. To an individual such as Richard, a 20-minute delay felt like an endless duration. Each moment squandered on the runway meant less time for preparation once in London. He remained, seething with rage, his foot tapping a steady beat on the floor. Compounding the issue, the young man in seat 2A, whom Richard would later discover with dread was named Marcus, was not sitting quietly. He wasn't making noise, but his mere presence appeared sufficient to infuriate Richard. Marcus occupied himself by drawing in a notepad. The soft scraping of the charcoal pencil was subtle, almost imperceptible amidst the engine's drone. However, for Richard, the sound was akin to fingernails dragging across a blackboard. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Richard brought his newspaper down. "Would you mind ceasing that?" Marcus raised his gaze. "Cease what?" "That sound. It's continuous." "I'm simply sketching," Marcus replied. "I can't truly make it any softer." "Then discontinue drawing," Richard retorted. After turning away, Marcus hesitated. His eyes fell upon his sketchbook. The illustration depicted a dwelling, an aged Victorian-style residence featuring a spacious veranda. He exhaled, shut the volume, and stowed it. He replaced his ear coverings. Richard experienced a rush of contentment and a sense of command. That was precisely his requirement. He desired to perceive himself as the dominant presence in the space. The aircraft proceeded slowly towards the runway. The engines thundered. pressing them firmly against their seats. When the enormous Boeing 747 ascended into the overcast Chicago heavens, the moment the seat belt indicator extinguished, Sarah Jenkins emerged with the beverage trolley. A crystal tumbler of scotch was set by her on Richard's tray table. "There you are, Mr. Sterling." He grumbled, "It's about time." Then, "And what about you, Sarah?" Marcus inquired, her tone becoming considerably gentler. "Just an apple juice, if you please, ma'am." A genuine, radiant smile lit up Marcus's face, making him appear even more youthful than his years. Just a moment, while Sarah was pouring the beverage, the aircraft suddenly encountered an air pocket. It wasn't severe, merely an abrupt descent, a moment of dense air. The service cart shook. For an instant, Sarah faltered. A modest amount of apple juice sloshed over the cup's edge. Neither Marcus nor Sarah was struck. Gravity, with its peculiar irony, propelled the sticky, sweet liquid to the left. It landed squarely on the sleeve of Richard Sterling's Armani suit jacket. Richard fixated on the dark stain, marring the gray fabric. Time appeared to halt. He first eyed the juice. Then he glanced at Sarah before deliberately rotating his head, like a gun turret, to face Marcus. According to Richard's warped reasoning, the young man was to blame. Had the young man not requested the juice, it wouldn't have soiled his attire. "You inept fool," Richard spat, directing his anger at Marcus, "not Sarah, sir." The plane hit turbulence. Sarah swiftly cut in, reaching for a serviette. "Allow me to assist you in blotting that. Keep your distance." Richard slapped her hand aside. He rose, looming over the partition between the seats. "Observe this. This garment is a $5,000 suit." Marcus gazed upward, his eyes wide with surprise. "I was not responsible for this." "Your very presence is the problem," Richard yelled. "You, your beverage, your skateboard, and your hooded sweatshirt. You have no place here. Just look at yourself. You're likely traveling on stolen frequent flyer miles or a diversity visa." The aircraft's interior fell into complete silence. The engine's drone seemed far away. All eyes were fixed on them. "Sir, please take your seat," Sarah stated, her voice quivering yet firm. "You are creating a disruption." "I am the source of the commotion," Richard chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. "I hold platinum status with this carrier. I essentially fund your wages. This ruffian is the actual problem." Marcus rose to his feet. He matched Richard's height almost exactly, despite being considerably leaner. "Refrain from labeling me a thug," Marcus stated, his tone now deeper, his courteous demeanor vanishing. "I haven't uttered a single word to you." "Take a seat, young man," Richard scoffed, adding, "before I instruct the marshal to remove you from this aircraft in restraints." Marcus declared, "I do not fear you." Richard's gaze sharpened. He moved in tightly, near enough for Marcus to detect the scent of scotch on his exhalation. "You ought to be," Richard murmured, "because individuals such as myself govern this planet, and youths like you merely tidy it." Richard then pivoted and resumed his seat, indicating the conversation's conclusion. Adrenaline surged through him. He experienced a sense of dominance. He angrily blotted his sleeve with a serviette, simmering with rage. He resolved at that very moment to lodge a formal grievance against the flight attendant and ensure the young man was prohibited from the airline. He intended to spoil their days purely for his own amusement. However, the flight had not yet finished with them. 60 minutes elapsed. The illumination was lowered. Richard requested yet another scotch. Then one more. The plane's instability came back, more severe on this occasion. The pilot's voice sounded through the cabin's speaker system. "Good evening, everyone. This is Captain Miller speaking. We are encountering some rough air currents above the Atlantic. Kindly secure your seatbelts. To our flight crew, please occupy your assigned seats." The aircraft vibrated intensely. Marcus, occupying seat 2A, had been slumbering. The sudden movement roused him. His arm, previously resting on the armrest, slid off. His elbow struck the partition, causing Richard's beverage to be jostled. The drinking vessel tilted. Golden brown fluid spilled onto Richard's lap. The incident unfolded as if in slow motion. The frigid ice and stinging spirits permeated Richard's pants. Richard neither shrieked nor yelled. He simply lost control. Weeks of accumulated stress, insufficient rest, and deep-seated bias, coupled with a sense of privilege, converged into a singular point of uncontrolled fury. Richard released his seatbelt. The indicator for fastened seatbelts glowed a vivid crimson overhead, yet he paid it no mind. He rose to his feet. Marcus was frantically gathering paper napkins. "Oh my goodness, I apologize profusely." Richard interrupted him before he could complete his statement. He propelled himself across the partition. His hand, adorned with a substantial gold signet ring, made forceful contact with Marcus's cheek. A sharp crack echoed. It was not an open-handed strike, but rather a forceful blow from a clenched fist. The noise was repulsive, akin to a cantaloupe hitting pavement. Marcus's head recoiled sharply, striking the window pane. Crimson blood erupted, arterial fluid spattering vividly onto the aircraft cabin's white plastic surface. Marcus sagged in his chair, disoriented, bringing his hands up to shield his countenance. "You disgusting wretch!" Richard shrieked. He seized Marcus by the neck of his hooded sweatshirt, pulling him partially from his seat. He prepared to strike once more. "Sterling, cease at once!" Sarah cried out from the service area, unfastening her crew seat and rushing down the passageway, battling the violent air currents that were flinging the airplane around like a plaything. However, she was positioned too distantly. Richard continued to hit him repeatedly. He was assaulting the young man. He was releasing his pent-up tension. He was lashing out at his own shortcomings. Marcus offered no resistance. He merely attempted to protect his skull, coiling himself into a fetal position. Crimson liquid streamed down his jawline, falling onto his gray hooded top, staining it dark. "Desist! Assist him!" A female passenger in the third row shrieked. A gentleman from seat 1F, identified as the technology company's CEO, unfastened his belt and sprang towards Richard. Seizing his arm, the man shouted, "Release him!" Richard whirled, his gaze frantic, his complexion flushed from effort. He propelled the technology CEO rearward into the passageway. "Keep your hands off me! Do you have any idea who I am?" Richard bellowed, his chest rising and falling heavily. He directed a blood-stained digit toward Marcus, who lay prostrate, struggling to breathe through a fractured nose. "He physically attacked me. He launched an assault." The aircraft abruptly descended 300 feet due to a turbulent air current. Richard stumbled. He toppled rearward, colliding with his assigned seat. Sarah Jenkins appeared immediately, though not to assist Richard. She positioned herself between Richard and Marcus, extending her arms protectively. Her complexion was ashen, tears brimming in her eyes, yet her resolve was unyielding. "Do not budge," she ordered, her voice cracking. "You absolutely must not stir." Richard gasped for breath, adjusting his coat. He observed his hand. His finger joints were lacerated. He glanced at Marcus. The young man's countenance was devastated. An eye immediately swelled completely shut. His nasal bone was visibly fractured, twisted sideways. Sanguine fluid covered everything. Richard experienced an abrupt, chilling moment of realization. "What have I committed? No, he instantly rationalized. He incited me. It was an act of self-preservation. I will retain the finest legal counsel. My name is Richard Sterling." He splashed a beverage on me. Richard fabricated, his voice lacking air. He menaced me. The aircraft interior was hushed, utterly still. Not a soul uttered a word, no one stirred. The sole audible noise was the external wind's roar and Marcus's moist, rattling attempts to inhale. Each set of gazes within the premium cabin was directed at Richard. Their expressions no longer conveyed apprehension. Instead, they showed pure, unmitigated revulsion. Subsequently, the intercommunication system signaled. This was not the standard pilot's broadcast. "Captain Miller speaking." The tone was strained, irate. "Cabin crew, ensure the cabin is secured without delay." "We are changing course," Richard sneered, dabbing sanguine fluid from his palm onto a serviette. "Rerouting? Preposterous. I have an appointment scheduled in London." He gazed at Sarah. "Bring me a cloth and inform the captain that I refuse to tolerate a reroute. I will litigate this airline until its collapse." Sarah remained motionless. She was applying a cold pack to Marcus's countenance. She raised her gaze to Richard, and for the initial time, Richard perceived an expression in her eyes that genuinely unnerved him. It wasn't dread. It was expectation. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah declared, her tone frigid, "you will not be traveling to London. You're not departing. And who exactly intends to prevent me?" Richard scoffed. "You, perhaps." "No." A voice emerged from his rear. Richard spun around. A man stood in the passageway. Having quietly transitioned from the economy cabin amidst the disorder, he was immense, 6'4", powerfully built, clad in a plain tracksuit. Yet, it was the insignia suspended from his neck that gleamed. Federal Air Marshal. The individual stated. "Take your seat immediately." Richard complied, though even at that moment, while seated in his suit, now marked with blood, he imagined he could negotiate his release. He perceived it as a mere miscommunication. He was oblivious that the youth he had just struck was no ordinary adolescent. He was unaware that the actual confidential name on the passenger list, Marcus Hayes, possessed greater significance in the aviation sector than Richard could possibly conceive. Once the aircraft touched down, the cabin's quietude would yield to the clamor of retribution. The stillness aboard Flight 402 was not serene. It lacked the tranquility of a library or the calm of a slumbering residence. It felt like a dense, stifling shroud that appeared to draw all the air from the compartment. It mirrored the quiet in a courtroom immediately following a guilty pronouncement. Prior to the judge's mallet striking, Richard Sterling occupied seat 1A, his wrists firmly restrained by the plastic flex cuffs the air marshal kept for such circumstances. They pressed into his flesh, tugging at the delicate hairs on his wrists, impeding blood flow to his hands. His custom-tailored suit jacket, soiled by apple juice and now dotted with Marcus's blood, felt like an ill-fitting garment. He attempted to adjust his posture, but the air marshal, who had identified himself solely as Agent Cole, was positioned in the aisle seat of row 1B, observing him with the unwavering gaze of a raptor. "These are excessively constricting," Richard murmured, endeavoring to maintain a subdued yet commanding tone. "I suffer from a medical condition. Circulatory problems. You will be held accountable for any neural harm." Agent Cole neither flinched nor uttered a word. He simply gazed. "Did you comprehend me?" Richard retorted, his former haughtiness reigniting like a fading ember. "I stated they are overly restrictive, and I insist on conversing with the pilot. This rerouting is unwarranted. The youth is perfectly well. Observe him." Richard indicated row 2 with a nod of his chin. Marcus was far from well. Sarah Jenkins and a physician located in business class were providing care. Marcus lay in a reclined position, an ice pack held against his countenance. The cloths encircling his neck were saturated crimson. He exhibited minimal movement, merely trembling faintly, probably due to trauma. The sight of the blood did not evoke remorse in Richard. Instead, it irritated him. Feebleness. He mused, "The child is exaggerating." "Utter one more syllable," Agent Cole stated, his voice a deep murmur that did not extend beyond the initial row. "One more utterance from you, and I will muzzle you, and believe me, I will not employ anything as soft as a serviette." Richard sealed his lips. He surveyed the aircraft's interior, yearning for an associate. Surely, someone present comprehended. Surely, someone recognized that he was the casualty of a tumultuous setting. He exchanged glances with the technology CEO in seat 1F. The man was typing rapidly on his mobile device, presumably utilizing the onboard internet. He raised his head, met Richard's stare, and slowly shook his head with an expression of utter contempt. He rotated his phone's display toward Richard. For a fleeting moment, Richard narrowed his eyes. It was a social media post. "Witnessed a madman almost end a child's life in first class. The individual in 1A, who caused the flight's rerouting, is truly monstrous. Footage to be released shortly." A cold bead of perspiration traced a path down Richard's back. For the video, he surveyed the aircraft's interior. A well-off lady in the third row had her mobile device raised. The camera's optic was aimed squarely at him, from the economy section. A youth in row 4 was also capturing footage. Beyond the drawn curtain, he observed faces gazing into their phones, held aloft like small, dark-looking glasses. They mirrored his impending downfall. The incident was recorded. Richard's thoughts accelerated. Crisis management. I require crisis management. I'll assert he possessed a weapon. I'll claim he issued a bomb threat. It's my testimony versus his. I hold the title of vice president. He's an unknown individual in a hooded sweatshirt. The aircraft sharply inclined to the port side. The engine's power was decreased. The sound shifted from a deep rumble to a high-pitched hum. Ladies and gentlemen. Captain Miller's voice resonated through the cabin speaker. It lacked the customary amiable pilot's rhythm. His tone was firm, businesslike, and concise. Our initial descent into Bangor, Maine, is now commencing. Air traffic control has directed us to land without delay. Owing to an onboard security matter, kindly stay seated with your seatbelts secured. Local law enforcement will greet the plane. Bangor, Maine, Richard inwardly sneered. His intended destination was Heathrow. He was meant to be engaging with financiers in London's financial district. Instead, he was touching down in an isolated locale. This will set me back millions, Richard whispered to himself. It will cost you considerably more than that, Agent Cole remarked, gazing at the swiftly moving gray clouds outside the window. Richard's gaze returned to Marcus. The young boy had momentarily removed the ice pack, allowing the physician to inspect his nose. Richard observed the boy's face distinctly for the first time after the adrenaline subsided. The child's nasal bone was fractured. The nasal bridge had caved in. Both eyes were swelling closed, acquiring a dark, angry violet hue. His lip was severely lacerated. For an instant, merely a fleeting moment, Richard experienced a wave of queasiness. The sight was grim. It resembled the aftermath of an automobile collision. I caused that, but then my self-preservation instincts activated. He ought not to have been in first class. He shouldn't have interfered with my beverage. He encroached upon my personal area. The aircraft moved downwards through the clouds. Beneath them, Maine's vast woodlands seemed bleak and harsh. The landing strip at Bangor International Airport emerged, a ribbon of gray pavement within the verdant landscape. When the landing gear extended with a metallic clunk, the whole passenger compartment appeared to pause. No conversations, no papers crinkling, only the whoosh of the air. As the tires screeched on the asphalt and the thrust reversers bellowed, Richard experienced the aircraft's deceleration. It seemed like a definitive conclusion. The aircraft reduced speed, veering from the primary landing strip. Yet it did not proceed to a boarding gate. It failed to approach a jetway where a heated terminal awaited. It moved slowly to an isolated section of the airport, distant from the main building. Richard gazed through the window. On the apron, no luggage personnel were present. 6 police vehicles were present, their blue and red lights silently strobing in the dim daylight. An emergency medical vehicle was also there, along with a pair of dark SUVs featuring darkened glass. A reception party, Agent Cole remarked, releasing his safety belt. You ought to feel privileged. Mr. Sterling, typically, the FBI isn't dispatched for a minor battery. The FBI. Richard's chest pounded. This situation is a mistake. This concerns a local issue, not when the incident occurs at an altitude of 30,000 feet. Cole offered a grin, devoid of amusement. It falls under federal authority. You've entered a more serious arena. The aircraft stopped, its engines gradually ceasing their noise. The fastened seatbelt indicator extinguished. Typically, at this point, passengers rise, collect their luggage, and hurry towards the exit. No one stirred. All remained in their seats. They desired to witness the spectacle. They sought retribution. The aircraft door swung open. Chilly, crisp air flooded in, carrying scents of pine and jet fuel. A mobile staircase was positioned. For law enforcement personnel in specialized attire entered the aircraft, trailed by a pair of emergency medical technicians. The EMTs hurried past Richard, directly to Seat 2A. "Mister, are you able to hear me?" An EMT inquired softly of Marcus. "Yes," Marcus rasped. "My head aches." "We'll extract you from this place, young man. Take it easy." They assisted Marcus to his feet. While moving past Richard's spot, aided by the medical staff, Marcus paused. He gazed down at Richard with his inflamed eyes, past the gore and the agony. He observed the individual who had assaulted him. Richard anticipated fury. He foresaw an expletive. However, Marcus merely slowly swayed his head. An expression of deep disillusionment etched upon his features. "You truly made a grave error," Marcus murmured before departing. He was guided down the steps to the emergency vehicle that was standing by. "Richard Sterling," a booming voice announced from the entrance. A man, clad in a suit and an FBI windbreaker, was present. He appeared elderly, with gray hair and a countenance etched with the trials of many difficult years. "I'm Richard Sterling," Richard stated, attempting to rise. However, Agent Cole pressed him back into his seat by his shoulder. "You're being apprehended for federal assault, obstructing a flight crew, and jeopardizing aircraft safety," the FBI agent declared, approaching him. "I demand my attorney, and I want these restraints removed. I've been provoked," he asserted. "Bring him to his feet," the FBI agent signaled to the tactical officers. 2 officers seized Richard's arms and pulled him from his seat. They didn't treat him with care. Instead, they escorted him forcefully along the aisle. While Richard was guided past the passenger rows, he observed their expressions: revulsion, fury, compassion. Subsequently, from the rear of the first-class section, a person began to slowly applaud. Another person joined, and soon the entire cabin was applauding, not in his honor. They clapped because he was departing. They celebrated his expulsion. "Savages," Richard yelled at them while being pulled toward the exit. "You're all savages." He was pushed onto the metallic stairs. The frigid, strong wind lashed his hair across his features. He gazed down at the airfield. The SUV stood ready. He was on the verge of realizing that the quiet aircraft had been the most significant warning he had ever disregarded. The interrogation chamber at the Bangor Field office appeared austere. Its cinder block walls were coated in a dismal beige hue. A steel table was secured to the floor, and a two-way mirror, Richard understood, concealed individuals observing him. He had remained there for a duration of 3 hours. They had confiscated his shoestrings, his waist belt, his mobile device, his billfold, and his self-respect. He remained seated in his soiled socks, his costly suit now creased and emitting the odor of old perspiration. He had instantly requested his phone communication. He had contacted his private lawyer, a formidable figure named David Thorne, whose services commanded $800 per hour. David's voice conveyed reassurance. "Stay calm, Richard. Utter nothing. I'm en route. We'll secure your release on bail. It's merely a minor assault. We'll portray it as a consensual altercation. Simply remain silent." Consequently, Richard remained seated. He experienced a slow-burning fury, yet underneath it, initial signs of apprehension began to surface. The FBI agents had not posed numerous inquiries to him thus far. They had only completed his processing: fingerprints, a booking photo, and a DNA sample. This seemed disproportionate. Why were they handling this as if it were a terrorism investigation? It was merely a physical altercation, wasn't it? A lopsided one, perhaps, but a fight nonetheless. Conflicts among men occurred. It was a common occurrence. The entrance swung open. It wasn't the FBI agent who had been on the aircraft. A female entered. She wore a crisp navy business suit that likely surpassed the value of Richard's attire. She held a leather brief and moved with a gait implying proprietorship of the premises. She didn't resemble a police officer. Rather, she appeared predatory. She took a seat across from Richard, setting the brief on the table. She simply clasped her hands atop it and fixed her gaze upon him. "Mr. Sterling," she inquired, her tone calm and neutral. "Who are you?" Richard then scoffed. "Where's my legal counsel?" "Your attorney is en route," she stated. "I am Elena Vance, an assistant United States attorney. I will be managing your prosecution." "Prosecution," Richard chuckled. "Let's not rush things, dear. This matter will be resolved outside of court. I'll issue a payment to the young man for his medical expenses, add a bit more for his distress, and then we can all depart. I have a merger awaiting completion in London." Eleanor Vance fixed her gaze upon him, her expression unblinking and devoid of a smile. "It appears you gravely misunderstand the seriousness of your predicament, Mr. Sterling. I am well aware of how things operate in this world." Richard moved closer. "Wealth speaks volumes, and I possess it. Do you, truly?" Eleanor questioned. "Or is it Vanguard Logistics that holds the funds?" Richard hesitated. "I represent Vanguard Logistics, No longer, Eleanor declared, pushing a document over the table. Richard's gaze dropped. It was an urgent press release. Vanguard Logistics denounces Richard Sterling's violent conduct. With immediate effect, Mr. Sterling's employment has been terminated due to cause. Vanguard Logistics opposes all manifestations of racism and aggression. Richard's hands trembled while he perused the text. This is impossible. I haven't even faced formal charges. I'm under contract. They viewed the footage, Richard. Eleanor gently stated, the video has been seen by all. Which video? Eleanor retrieved a tablet from her satchel, tapped its display, and rotated it. The footage, recorded from the third row, was unsteady, yet the sound quality was perfectly clear. Crack! The impact of Richard's punch on Marcus's face reverberated through the confined space. You scum! You have no place here! Richard's voice shrieked from the recording. The footage depicted Richard pulling the unconscious youth, striking him repeatedly while he lay on the ground. It revealed the blood. It displayed the raw, unmitigated animosity etched on Richard's countenance. Richard observed his own actions for the very first time. He perceived what everyone else had witnessed. He no longer appeared to be a formidable executive. He resembled a frenzied canine. He gulped with difficulty. It appears more severe than it actually was. Perspective. It's taken out of its proper setting. The background? Eleanor retrieved the tablet. Did you really knock a minor unconscious just for spilling juice on you? Furthermore, you uttered racial slurs during the incident. This escalates the charge to a hate crime. Federal laws, compulsory minimum sentences. Richard sensed the room beginning to spin. A hate crime. That meant jail time. Actual incarceration. I'm not prejudiced, Richard stuttered. I hire African Americans. That young man was showing disrespect. A jury will determine that, she stated. Eleanor stated, but that isn't even your most significant issue, Richard. Richard gazed at her. What could possibly be more serious than an accusation of a hate crime? Eleanor at last unzipped her brief. She extracted a document. Its cover displayed the emblem of Atlas Aviation, the parent corporation of the airline he'd flown. You chose to confront the incorrect traveler, Richard. You presumed due to his youth, race, and attire a hoodie, that he was inconsequential. You believed he lacked influence. He was a nobody, Richard exclaimed, now frantic. Just some skateboarder. That skateboarder, Eleanor stated, her tone deepening and turning gravely serious, was journeying to London for a particular purpose. He wasn't simply taking a holiday. I'm indifferent to his destination. You ought not to be, Eleanor replied, because the individual expecting him in London is his parent. Richard sank into his metallic seat. His father. What does that matter? Will his father also file a lawsuit against me? Join the queue. Eleanor Vance regarded Richard with a blend of compassion and incredulity. She tapped a digit on the folder. The young man's name is Marcus Hayes. Richard gave a slight shrug. Hayes, then, Eleanor reiterated, as in Jonathan Hayes? Richard furrowed his brow. The appellation seemed recognizable. He strained to recall. Jonathan Hayes. Was he a public official? A famous personality? Suddenly, understanding dawned. Richard's complexion paled with such rapidity that he appeared to have been preserved. Jonathan Hayes served as the originator and chief executive of Hayes Global, a private investment company with vast holdings. They possessed shipping enterprises, technology ventures, and most significantly, held the controlling interest in Vanguard Logistics, Richard's previous workplace. No, Richard murmured, that cannot be. Jonathan Hayes resides in New York. His offspring attend exclusive academies in Switzerland. They do not travel on commercial flights. They do not don hooded sweatshirts. Marcus was adopted, Eleanor clarified, relishing the expression of dread appearing on Richard's countenance. Jonathan Hayes took him in 5 years prior. They maintain his privacy to afford him an ordinary existence. Marcus favors commercial air travel as he dislikes the solitude of private aircraft. He enjoys being amidst others. He enjoys drawing individuals. Richard sensed an impending urge to vomit. He had just assaulted the offspring of the individual who owned his corporation, the person who dominated the entire sector. Marcus is a genius, Eleanor proceeded, exacerbating his distress. He was en route to London to receive an accolade for his architectural blueprints. The drawing pad you ridiculed held plans. for an innovative eco-friendly residential development in Chicago. Plans now stained with blood. I was unaware, Richard choked out. How could I have been informed? You made no effort to ascertain the truth, Eleanor stated. You perceived a cliché. You failed to see an individual. The entrance to the questioning chamber reopened. On this occasion, the ambience within the space shifted immediately. The atmosphere became thick and charged. An individual entered. He appeared to be in his late 50s, dressed in attire more expensive than Richard's vehicle. His hair was silver, and his gaze was like frigid, sharp shards of blue ice. This was Jonathan Hayes. He ignored Elena and the mirror, proceeding directly to the table to stare down at Richard. Richard cowered. Richard visibly recoiled in his seat. Mr. Hayes, he stammered. Sir, I truly apologize. It was a misapprehension. I was under pressure. I wasn't aware he was your son. Jonathan Hayes neither shouted nor shrieked. His voice was a terrifyingly composed whisper. Do you believe it's significant that he's my son? Jonathan inquired. Yes. No, I mean, had he been the child of someone else? Would it have been acceptable to injure his face? Jonathan questioned. Richard remained silent. Jonathan bent forward, resting his hands on the tabletop. You shattered his nose, Richard. His orbital bone is fractured. He requires an operation. He's currently in a hospital bed, wondering why a stranger wished to harm him. I didn't intend to kill him. You assaulted a minor, Jonathan stated. You are spineless. Jonathan straightened up, fastening his coat. I desired to meet your gaze, Jonathan declared. I wished to observe the individual who considered himself above fundamental human respect. And what do I perceive? I perceive a nobody. Please, Richard pleaded. My profession, my existence. Do not ruin me. Jonathan smirked. It was a predatory grin. Oh, I have no need to ruin you, Richard. You accomplished that on your own. The footage is trending. It boasts 40 million views. The whole planet despises you. Jonathan faced the exit. Yet to ensure his point, he halted, his hand resting on the doorknob. I've directed my legal counsel to suspend your funds until the civil litigation concludes. I've reached out to all significant logistics companies across the continent. You will never be employed in this sector again. You won't even secure work operating a forklift. Mr. Hayes, I beg you. Richard wept, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. And Richard. Jonathan cast a final glance backward. That attire, it's destroyed, precisely like you. Jonathan exited. Elena Vance rose and collected her documents. The FBI personnel will return to convey you to the county detention center, she stated. Bail was refused. Concerns about flight risk and personal safety. Individuals are gathered outside the precinct awaiting you. You're safer within. She departed. The substantial metal door clanged shut, a loud thud. Richard Sterling found himself solitary. The quietness resumed, mirroring the stillness from the aircraft. Though this time, it wasn't the quiet of expectation. It was the quietness of a sepulture. Richard Sterling's legal proceedings evolved into the year's most observed judicial occurrence. More than merely a trial, it was a public deconstruction of an individual embodying the most egregious corporate hubris. The silent plane incident, as named by the press, had resonated worldwide. Half a year following the event, the federal courthouse in Bangor was overwhelmed. Satellite vehicles occupied the roadways for several blocks. Demonstrators gathered outdoors, displaying placards proclaiming, "Justice for Marcus and ban racists from flying," indoors. The ambience was oppressively strained. Richard occupied a seat at the defense's bench. He appeared to be a mere shadow of the person who had embarked on Flight 402. His tan had vanished, supplanted by a correctional facility complexion, a sickly grayish-yellow hue resulting from insufficient sun exposure, and a diet of refined carbohydrates. He had shed 30 pounds. The suit, supplied by his public defender after his costly attorney, David Thorne, withdrew due to a bounced payment, now sagged on his body because of the frozen assets. Gone was the appearance of a vice president. Instead, he resembled a terrified creature ensnared in a predicament of his own creation. The prosecution, spearheaded by the unyielding Elena Vance, meticulously covered every detail. Her objective extended beyond merely securing a conviction. She sought to establish a deterrent. The accused didn't simply attack a young person, Eleanor declared to the jury, as she moved before the witness stand during her opening remarks. He violated the fundamental principle of security. He transformed a premium cabin into a brutal arena, acting on the conviction that his position, his clothing, and his complexion granted him license to dominate anyone who caused him slight annoyance. The testimonies presented were highly incriminating. Sarah Jenkins then proceeded to give her evidence. Though outwardly calm, her voice quivered. She recounted the sound of the blow, describing it as a damp, sharp impact to the silent courtroom. For 2 decades, I've worked in aviation. I've handled intoxicated passengers and health crises. Yet, I've never encountered such pure, unwarranted animosity in anyone's gaze. He clearly relished it. He even grinned following the act. Richard recoiled from the evidence. He yearned to shout falsehood, but understood the bailiff behind him was merely seeking a pretext to restrain him. Subsequently, the video footage appeared. It was projected onto an enormous display within the courtroom. Each instance Richard's voice shrieked "You scum!" via the court's superior sound system. The jury members winced. Richard found himself unable to observe. He fixed his gaze on his hands, the very ones that had delivered the strike, noticing their uncontrollable shaking. At that moment, he grasped that the footage constituted his lasting impression. He would not be recalled for the transactions he finalized or the vast sums he managed. Instead, he would be remembered as the yelling madman from Seat 1A. However, the conclusive evidence came from Marcus Hayes himself. As Marcus stepped into the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. He used a walking stick, a temporary support for a hip injury he suffered when Richard had pulled him. Furthermore, his face still displayed the subtle, pale surgical marks. His nose had undergone reconstruction, yet it possessed a minor alteration, serving as an enduring testament to the aggression. He never once directed his gaze toward Richard. He took his seat in the witness stand and spoke in a low tone. My intention wasn't to disturb him. I was enjoying jazz music. I was sketching a house for an art competition. My sole desire was to reach London, to present my father with what I had created. In what ways has this event affected your existence, Marcus? Eleanor questioned with tenderness. Marcus averted his gaze. I no longer travel by air. It's simply not possible for me. I experience severe anxiety episodes when confined to small spaces. I'm plagued by recurring dreams where the overhead structure collapses upon me. I once cherished encountering new individuals. Presently, I harbor fear towards everyone. The jury members were visibly distressed, indeed shedding tears. Richard's court-appointed attorney bent closer and murmured, "It's concluded. Brace yourself." The jury's decision was delivered in under 2 hours. Convicted on every charge: federal battery resulting in severe physical harm, obstruction of flight personnel, and the most significant charge, an aggravated hate crime. Judge Harrison, a severe individual intolerant of arrogance, peered over his eyeglasses at Richard during the sentencing proceedings held to weeks subsequent. "Mr. Sterling," the judge pronounced, his voice resonating loudly, "you have experienced a life of immense advantage. You were afforded every benefit, and you exploited those benefits to demean, intimidate, and physically harm a young man who was simply coexisting in your vicinity. You pose a menace to the community, not owing to possession of a weapon, but because you possess no conscience. Your Honor, I beg you," Richard rasped, rising, his face wet with tears. "I've forfeited all, my employment, my residence, my standing." "Is that not sufficient retribution?" "No," Judge Harrison stated plainly. "That is merely the outcome. The actual penalty begins presently." The judge's hammer struck with a resounding crash. "I hereby condemn you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary, ineligible for early release for a minimum of 12 years. You are to be taken into custody at once." 15 years. Richard's legs gave way. The bailiff seized his arms forcefully, mirroring his own treatment of Marcus, and dragged him off. His final sight before the massive wooden door closed was Jonathan Hayes in the back row, observing him with an icy, emotionless gaze. A federal penitentiary bore no resemblance to cinematic portrayals. It lacked perpetual gang conflicts and uprisings. For a man like Richard, it was a more profound torment, It was monotonous, noisy, and squalid. Richard was transferred to FCI Fort Dix. He was divested of his identity, becoming prisoner 49 at Duhudu. 54. The initial 7 days shattered him. Richard, accustomed to luxurious 1,000-thread-count Egyptian cotton bedding, now rested on a slender, mildew-scented vinyl cot. He was accustomed to rising at his leisure. Now a shrill alarm roused him at 6 a.m. for the morning count. He had enjoyed prime cuts and fine whiskey. Now he consumed a meat paste and sipped tepid water from a plastic cup. However, the real retribution manifested as his labor detail within prison walls. All inmates are assigned duties. The counselors examined Richard's dossier. They noted his curriculum vitae, a vice president in logistics and executive management. Typically, inmates with higher education secured administrative roles in the prison library or by teaching GED classes. However, the superintendent had viewed the footage. The warden delegated Richard to the hygiene crew, tasking him specifically with scrubbing the latrines in cell block D. Each day at precisely 7 o'clock, Richard Sterling, the individual who once recoiled at a soiled backpack near his attire, was compelled to don yellow rubber gloves, grasp a scrub brush, and sanitize the commodes of 500 other men. "You overlooked an area, Sterling," the guard would remark, tipping the pail of sudsy water onto Richard's footwear. "Clean it up," a fellow prisoner would jeer as they walked by. "That's your sole purpose, isn't it?" It was a torment of endless repetition. Cleanse, flush, redo. The other inmates were aware of his past. Inmates adhere to an unwritten rule. They dislike those who harm children and those who act as tyrants. Richard found himself shunned. He dined in solitude. Should he attempt to join a table, the other individuals would merely rise and depart. He was subjected to the same contempt he had shown Marcus, as an impurity. After 2 years of his incarceration, Richard was in the common room. He was visibly gaunt now, his hair entirely silver, his hands coarse and hardened due to the harsh chemicals and constant scrubbing. He was swabbing the floor while the other inmates observed the lone television screen, affixed high on the partition. "Hey, boost the volume," one inmate shouted. "This is that program about architecture." Richard raised his gaze. On the screen was a resplendent awards gala in London, the Kyron Reed Pritzker Architecture Prize for young visionaries. And then he appeared, Marcus Hayes. He appeared more mature, more robust. He was clad in a perfectly tailored tuxedo and stood behind a lectern, clutching a crystal award. He exuded self-assurance. His facial scars now merely subtle marks that enhanced the distinctiveness of his grin. "This award is not solely for my benefit," Marcus declared into the microphone with a firm, resonant voice. "It belongs to all those who have been informed they are unwelcome in a particular space. Nearly 2 years back, I nearly surrendered. A man assaulted me, declaring I was worthless. He branded me as dirt." The camera focused tightly on Marcus's expression. "Yet I gained a crucial understanding that day." Marcus proceeded, "From dirt, foundations are constructed." He attempted to inter me, oblivious to the fact I was a seed. A thunderous ovation filled the ballroom. Jonathan Hayes, positioned in the front row, radiated pride as he dabbed a tear from his eye. Within the prison's television room, the incarcerated individuals also applauded. "That young man is truly resilient," remarked an inmate. Admiration. Subsequently, the camera transitioned back to the news presenter. "What an incredibly uplifting narrative from Marcus Hayes," the anchor stated. This stands in sharp opposition to his assailant, Richard Sterling, the shamed executive. He continues to be held at Fort Dix Correctional Facility. With a touch of irony, Hayes Global declared today their commitment of $5 million towards initiatives for prisoner rehabilitation. This funding is specifically allocated for inmate libraries and educational resources. Thus, in a sense, Marcus Hayes is currently assisting the very individual who sought to harm him. Richard let go of the mop. The pail struck the concrete flooring with a resounding clang. Silence descended upon the room, and the other prisoners turned their gaze toward him. Their expressions no longer conveyed rage. Instead, they regarded him with an emotion considerably more severe, condescension. He had become an object of charity. The young man he had once assaulted was now providing him assistance. Marcus achieved victory not through physical confrontation, but by leading a commendable life. Richard slumped onto a seat, burying his face in his hands. The scent of bleach and refuse emanated from the yellow rubber gloves. He shut his eyes, yet the sound of the televised applause remained inescapable. The journey had concluded, yet Richard Sterling would never truly settle. He was perpetually trapped within this upheaval. And so concludes the tale of how the monarch of O'Hare forfeited his dominion. It serves as a harsh admonition that one's true nature is not determined by the cost of their attire, but rather by their conduct towards those who are unable to offer them any advantage. Richard Sterling considered himself beyond regulations, yet ultimately natural forces prevail. He yearned for tranquility, and now he possesses a decade and a half of it within a stark concrete enclosure. Meanwhile, the young man he attempted to crush is constructing a more favorable world. One is prompted to contemplate how many individuals akin to Richard are presently occupying first-class seats, convinced of their dominion over the heavens, and how many individuals like Marcus are merely anticipating their opportunity to ascend. Should this narrative have deeply affected you, kindly press the like icon. This significantly assists the channel's expansion and signals your interest in additional narratives of retribution and justice. Remember to subscribe and activate the notification bell to ensure you never overlook new content. Do tell me in the comments section if you were seated in seat 1F. Would your intervention have come earlier? I'll catch you in the upcoming video. Take care.